Lady Sophia Langford had always believed that invisibility was a skill one could cultivate, much like embroidery or the art of pouring tea without rattling the cup. By the spring of 1852 she had perfected it. In the glittering ballrooms of Vienna, those marble palaces lit by 1,000 beeswax candles, where the air smelled of hothouse roses and ambition, she could stand against a gilded wall for an entire evening and remain entirely unseen by any gentleman under the age of 50. It was not that she lacked beauty in the conventional sense. Her features were regular, her skin clear, her auburn hair thick and shining. But beauty, she had learned, was only currency when accompanied by the correct performance, the fluttering lashes, the practiced giggle, the ability to look fascinated by talk of hunting dogs and horseflesh. Sophia had never mastered any of it. At 22, after 4 seasons of dutiful attendance, she had become a ghost in silk slippers. Debutantes who had come out the same year as she now had infants in lace caps, girls who had trailed behind her now sailed past on the arms of counts and princes. Sophia watched them with the detached curiosity of a naturalist observing migratory birds. She did not envy their triumphs. She only wished, sometimes, that her heart would cease its treacherous habit of beating faster whenever a certain tall figure appeared at the far end of a salon. Leopold von Hartmann, Duke of Schattenberg, was everything the empire expected of its highest nobility, wealthy beyond measure, impeccably mannered, and, cruelest of all, possessed of a mind sharp enough to make conversation with him feel like fencing with naked steel. Sophia had tasted that steel once, 3 years earlier, at the masked ball given by Princess Metternich in the Hofburg. She had worn a simple black domino that night, her face half hidden behind a silver filigree mask, and for 20 stolen minutes they had spoken of Goethe and Schiller, of the soul's hunger for meaning in an age of steam engines and stock exchanges. He had listened to her as though her thoughts mattered. Then the orchestra struck up a waltz, the Countess Isolde von Braun appeared in a gown sewn with real diamonds, and Leopold had bowed with exquisite regret before vanishing into the swirl of satin and perfume. Since that night Sophia had seen him perhaps 30 times, always across crowded rooms, always with the same exquisite creatures clinging to his sleeve. Each glimpse was a fresh wound she refused to bandage. She told herself it was mere intellectual admiration. She almost believed it. This particular April morning found her in the breakfast room of the Langfords' rented palace on the Schubert Ring, sunlight striping the parquet through half-closed shutters. Her mother, the Countess of Eldridge, an English beauty who had never quite forgiven Vienna for being foreign, was reading aloud from the court circular while Sophia picked at a plate of cold pheasant she did not want. "And His Excellency the Earl has an important visitor arriving at 3 o'clock, Lady Eldridge announced, lowering the paper just enough to fix her daughter with a meaningful stare. "Prince Nikolaus Esterhazy himself has hinted the gentleman is seeking a wife. English blood, continental title, such alliances are not to be sniffed at, Sophia." Sophia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Mamma, the last important visitor, spent the entire afternoon explaining why women should not ride astride. I nearly perished of boredom. "That," her mother said crisply, "is because you wore that dreadful puce gown and refused to smile. Today you will wear the new pearl gray silk with the Brussels lace, and you will smile until your cheeks ache if necessary." Sophia felt the familiar rebellion rise in her chest like bile. For seasons of smiling until her cheeks ached had purchased her exactly nothing but headaches and the reputation of being difficult. She set her fork down with deliberate care. "Actually, Mamma, I have the headache has already begun. I believe I shall spend the afternoon in my room with a compress and Monsieur Comte." Lady Eldridge's lips thinned to a line that had terrified governesses in 3 countries. "You will do no such thing. Your father has gone to considerable trouble." "Trouble," Sophia interrupted softly, "that has never yet resulted in a single gentleman seeing past my dowry long enough to discover I possess a mind." She rose, smoothing her morning dress, a perfectly respectable dove-gray cambric, though already 2 seasons old. "If this visitor desires a decorative wife, he will be disappointed. If he desires conversation, he may have it. But I refuse to dress the part of broodmare at auction. She left the breakfast room before her mother could summon a suitably cutting reply, climbing the curving marble staircase with the calm of a woman walking to the scaffold she has chosen herself. In her bedchamber she dismissed her maid, Anna, with the excuse of a sick headache, an excuse Anna accepted with the sympathetic air of one who had suffered many such headaches on her mistress's behalf. Then Sophia opened the cavernous rosewood armoire and surveyed its contents like a general before battle. There were gowns enough to clothe half the débutantes in Vienna, confections of silk and tulle in every shade of acceptable pastels, trimmed with lace from Valenciennes, ribbons from Lyon, seed pearls from Ceylon. At the very back, half forgotten, hung the dress she sought, an olive-brown kerseymere morning gown purchased in a fit of economy during her second season and immediately condemned by her mother as fit only for a Quaker schoolmistress. It was shapeless, high-necked, and the color of wet November leaves. Perfect. Sophia pulled it on without stays, another small rebellion, and regarded herself in the cheval glass. The gown hung from her like a sack tied in the middle. The muddy hue turned her complexion sallow and her eyes a flat hazel instead of their usual bright green. She tore at her hair until the careful braids Anna had woven that morning collapsed into a careless knot at her nape, then yanked out a few more strands for good measure. No jewelry. No gloves. No perfume save the faint lavender sachets in her drawers. She looked, in short, like a woman who had dressed in the dark after a sleepless night of grief. Or, more accurately, like a woman who had ceased to care whether anyone looked at her twice. Sophia smiled at her reflection, a fierce, sudden smile that had nothing to do with docility. "Let them come," she whispered to the drab creature in the mirror. "Let the important gentleman come and be bored by the Earl of Eldridge's bluestocking daughter in all her glory." She did not know, could not possibly have known, that the important gentleman due at 3 o'clock was His Grace the Duke of Schattenberg, nor that he had spent 3 years searching crowded ballrooms for a pair of green eyes that had once dared to argue with him about the nature of the human soul. She only knew that, for the first time in 4 seasons, she felt free. Sophia lingered at the mirror longer than she cared to admit, turning this way and that, studying the effect of the olive-brown kerseymere as though it were a scientific experiment. The dress was truly hideous. It swallowed her waist, drooped at the shoulders, and ended in a hem that had been let down twice and still managed to look stingy. The color did something unforgivable to her skin, turned the faint roses in her cheeks to the grayish pallor of November fog. Even the buttons, dull horn instead of pearl, seemed to sulk. She looked like a governess who had lost a wager with fate. Good, she told herself, tugging one last strand of hair loose so that it curled defiantly against her temple. Let them see exactly what they have ignored for 4 years. Downstairs, the house was already stirring with the nervous energy that preceded an important visitor. Footmen darted past with fresh flowers, the housekeeper barked orders about the precise angle of the silver tray, her mother's voice floated up the stairwell in rising crescendos of anxiety. Sophia listened to it all from the landing, hands braced on the cool marble balustrade, and felt a reckless calm settle over her, the same calm, she imagined, that a soldier feels in the moment before stepping onto the battlefield he has already decided not to flee. She descended slowly, each step deliberate. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2:30, the visitor was not due for another 30 minutes, but her mother had insisted the family assemble early, to present a picture of domestic harmony. Sophia almost laughed aloud at the thought. Domestic harmony in the Langford house usually consisted of her father buried in dispatches, her mother cataloguing imaginary slights, and Sophia herself hiding in the library with a volume of Schopenhauer balanced on her knee. Lady Eldridge was waiting at the foot of the stairs like a general inspecting troops. She took one look at her daughter and actually swayed. Sophia. The single word emerged as a strangled hiss. What in heaven's name have you done? Sophia reached the bottom step and paused, allowing her mother the full, uninterrupted view. "I dressed, Mama. You did request that I appear." "That is not a dress." Lady Eldridge's gaze raked from the tragic neckline to the scuffed half-boots peeping beneath the hem. "That is, sabotage." A smile, small, sharp, and entirely genuine, curved Sophia's mouth. "Precisely." For a moment her mother seemed robbed of speech, lips opening and closing like a carp hauled onto marble. Then fury rushed in to fill the vacuum. "You will go upstairs this instant and change into the pearl-gray silk. Anna will redo your hair. You have 27 minutes. No." The single syllable fell between them like a gauntlet. Somewhere in the hall a footman dropped a vase water and pretended not to notice the drama unfolding 6 feet away. Lady Eldridge drew herself up until the feathers in her morning cap quivered with indignation. "Need I remind you that your father has expended considerable influence to secure this visit? The gentleman is seeking a wife with English blood and continental prospects," Sophia finished for her. "Yes, you mentioned. I am certain he will be delighted to discover that the Langford daughter comes with opinions attached. Or he will not. Either way, I refuse to trust myself like a Michaelmas goose for his approval." She stepped around her mother, an act of lèse-majesté in itself, and moved toward the drawing room. Behind her, Lady Eldridge made a sound perilously close to a squawk. "Sophia Marie Langford, you will not embarrass this family." But Sophia was already through the double doors. The drawing room was a confection of pale blue silk and gilt, the windows thrown open to the mild April air. Beyond the balcony the ringstrasse bustled with carriages. Inside, her father stood at the mantel examining a map of the Dalmatian coast with the absorbed frown he wore whenever politics threatened to interfere with luncheon. He glanced up as she entered, did a swift double-take, and then, to Sophia's private delight, the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Good God," he murmured, folding the map. "You look as though you've been rummaging in the attics at Eldridge Manor." "Close," Sophia replied, settling into the least flattering chair, an upright affair with horsehair that prickled even through bombazine. "I believe this gown once belonged to Great-Aunt Prudence. The one who was jilted by a Prussian hussar and took to wearing mourning for the rest of her life." Lord Eldridge gave a short bark of laughter before catching his wife's glacial expression in the doorway and converting it into a cough. "Well," he said mildly, "you are certainly distinctive." Lady Eldridge swept in like a frigate under full sail. "She is deranged. Sophia, I insist." But at that moment the butler appeared, silver tray in hand, bearing a single card. "His Grace the Duke of Schattenberg," he announced, and the name struck the room like a thunderclap. Sophia felt every drop of blood drain from her face, then rush back in a scalding tide. Leopold von Hartmann. Here. Now. In this room where she sat dressed like a Quaker governess who had lost a battle with a hedgerow. Her mother made a small, animal sound of panic. Her father's eyebrows rose so high they threatened to vanish into his hairline. And Sophia simply stared at the butler as though he had sprouted wings. The Duke of Schattenberg was not merely important. He was the catch of the decade, 30 years old, unmarried, richer than half the Habsburg cousins combined, and, most terrifying of all, the man whose voice still echoed in her dreams reciting lines from Faust while candlelight flickered across his angular face. She had one heartbeat to decide: bolt for the servant stairs, claim sudden plague, or stay and face the consequences of her rebellion. Her mother was already hissing instructions: smile, curtsy, for the love of heaven do not speak of philosophy, but Sophia barely heard. The reckless calm was back, stronger than before, laced now with something that felt perilously close to exhilaration. Let him see me like this, she thought. Let him see the truth and choke on it. She lifted her chin, folded her hands in her lap with deliberate composure, and waited for the storm to break. The clock on the mantel ticked once, twice, 3 times. Somewhere beyond the doors, polished boots sounded on marble. The Duke of Schattenberg was coming. And Sophia Langford, plain, opinionated, and currently dressed like a bankrupt librarian, was ready. The double doors opened with the soft inevitability of a guillotine. Leopold von Hartmann, Duke of Schattenberg, stepped across the threshold, and the drawing room seemed to shrink around him. He wore black, as always, a coat so perfectly tailored that it looked poured onto his frame, the severe color relieved only by the crisp white of his shirt and a single blood-red ruby glowing at his throat. Sunlight from the tall windows struck the sharp planes of his face, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked made for issuing orders or delivering kisses with equal precision, and for one suspended moment Sophia forgot how to breathe. He paused just inside the doorway, removing his gloves with the unhurried grace of a man accustomed to being stared at. His gaze swept the room, a courteous nod to Lord Eldridge, a flicker of recognition for Lady Eldridge, whose curtsy was so deep it threatened to topple her, and then it reached Sophia. She felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes, storm blue and far too perceptive, traveled over her with deliberate slowness, from the tragic knot of hair slipping its pins, across the sallow-making olive-brown kerseymere that hung like a penance, down to the scuffed boots she had not bothered to change. She waited for the polite mask to descend, the faint compression of lips that would signal aristocratic pity, or worse, indifference. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not the cool, practiced smile he granted hostesses and dowagers, but a real one, crooked, startled, almost boyish. His eyes warmed in a way that made the April sunlight feel suddenly inadequate. "Lady Sophia," he said, and his voice, low, resonant, with the faintest trace of a Swabian gravel, curled around her name like smoke. "I had not dared hope fate would be so generous." Generous? Sophia thought, dazed. "I look like I've been dragged through the Prater by a runaway fiacre." Lord Eldridge recovered first. "Your Grace. An unexpected pleasure. May I present my daughter, Lady Sophia Langford?" He gestured with the slightly desperate flourish of a man trying to distract a wolf from a particularly tender lamb. Leopold bowed, not the shallow inclination he offered equals, but a full, formal bow that belonged to an earlier, more courteous century. When he straightened, his gaze never left her face. "Lady Sophia," he repeated, softer now, as though tasting the words. "The pleasure is entirely mine." Lady Eldridge made a noise perilously close to a squeak. Sophia's father cleared his throat so violently he nearly choked. And Sophia simply sat there, hands clenched in her lap to hide their trembling, feeling as though the floor had tilted beneath her chair. She managed a curtsy only because her mother's glare propelled her to her feet. The kerseymere bunched awkwardly, one loose strand of hair chose that moment to slither free and cling to her damply to her cheek. She resisted the urge to shove it back. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Had I known we were to receive so illustrious a visitor, I might have attempted something more." She glanced down at herself and offered a wry half-smile. "Civilized." Leopold's answering smile widened, revealing a flash of white teeth. "On the contrary. In a city where every lady is trussed and painted like a Baroque altarpiece, your honesty is," he seemed to search for the right word. "Revolutionary." Revolutionary. The word hung in the air like a gauntlet. Lady Eldridge's fan began working so furiously it threatened to take flight. Lord Eldridge looked as though he were calculating how quickly he could summon smelling salts. Sophia felt laughter, wild, reckless, bubble up in her chest. "I must warn you, sir, revolutionary tendencies are considered contagious in polite circles. You may wish to stand farther away." "Impossible," Leopold replied at once. "I have spent 3 years attempting to stand closer." The room went perfectly, impossibly still. 3 years. He remembered. Sophia's heart performed a clumsy pirouette against her ribs. She opened her mouth, for denial, for caution, for anything resembling sense, but her mother descended like an avenging angel. "Tea!" Lady Eldridge announced in a voice pitched somewhere between hysteria and prayer. "We must have tea at once. Sophia, ring for Anna. No, never mind, I shall do it myself." She fled toward the bell pull as though the hounds of hell nipped at her embroidered heels. Lord Eldridge, left to salvage the situation, gestured toward the arrangement of chairs by the window. "Your Grace, pray be seated. We were just discussing the proposed railway to Trieste." But Leopold was still watched Sophia, and the look in his eyes made the grand room feel suddenly, dizzyingly intimate. "Lady Sophia," he said quietly, "will you not sit beside me? I find myself in sudden need of intelligent conversation to counterbalance the inevitable discussion of freight tariffs." There was a challenge in his tone, and something that dared her to be exactly as unaccommodating as she appeared. Sophia lifted her chin. The kerseymere rustled like dry leaves. "Only if you promise not to be shocked when I disagree with you, Your Grace." His laughed, a low, warm sound that seemed to stroke along her skin. "I will be bitterly disappointed if you do not." And just like that, the battlefield shifted. Sophia walked toward the offered chair on legs that barely felt attached to her body, every nerve singing with the impossible, intoxicating knowledge that Leopold von Hartmann, the Duke who could have any woman in Europe, was looking at her as though she were the only woman in the world. Outside, a carriage rattled past on the Ringstrasse. Inside, the grandfather clock struck the quarter hour. The game, Sophia realized with a thrill that bordered on terror, had only just begun. Sophia sat. It was a small act, lowering herself onto the sky-blue damask sofa, yet it felt like stepping off a cliff. The kerseymere gown pooled around her like a puddle of muddy water, one rebellious lock of hair slid forward again and tickled her jaw. She did not push it back. Let him see the full catastrophe, she told herself. Let there be no illusions. Leopold took the chair opposite her, close enough that the polished toes of his hessians almost touched the hem of her disastrous dress. He leaned back with the lazy confidence of a man who owned half the forests in Styria and the other half of the conversation in any room he entered. Yet his eyes never left her face. Lady Eldridge returned at a near run, followed by 2 footmen bearing the tea service as though it were the imperial regalia. Silver clinked, porcelain rattled, and her mother's voice rose in a frantic descant of instructions. "Milk or lemon, Your Grace?" "The lemon is from the estate in Corfu, quite superior. The biscuits are from Demel, Sophia never eats them, but I insisted." "Milk, thank you," Leopold said, mild as summer rain, though his gaze flicked once, amused, to Sophia, who had indeed never touched a Demel biscuit in her life. Sophia accepted a cup purely to have something to do with her hands. The saucer trembled, she steadied it with a willpower she usually reserved for reading Hegel in the original German. Steam curled between them like incense. Lord Eldridge attempted rescue. "Your Grace, you were saying about the Trieste Railway." "Later," Leopold said, still watching Sophia. "First, I find myself consumed by a far more pressing matter." He lifted one dark brow. "Lady Sophia, do you still condemn Goethe for making Faust's salvation dependent on a woman's love?" The question struck her like a match in a powder magazine. Her father choked on a macaroon. Her mother's teacup halted halfway to her lips. Sophia felt the laughter, dangerous, exultant, rise again. "I do," she answered, setting her cup down with a click that sounded unnaturally loud. "It is sentimental nonsense. A man who bargains his soul for knowledge and then pleads redemption because a pretty girl prays for him deserves neither knowledge nor redemption. Gretchen is the only tragic because Goethe needed a sacrificial lamb to balance his metaphysics." Silence. A silence so complete she could hear the bees droning in the window boxes. Then Leopold von Hartmann threw back his head and laughed, not the polite drawing-room chuckle, but a full, unguarded sound that seemed to startle even him. When he looked at her again, his eyes were bright with something that looked perilously close to triumph. "Precisely what you said 3 years ago, he murmured. Word for word. I have carried that sentence around like a talisman ever since. Lady Eldridge made a small, wounded sound. Lord Eldridge stared at his daughter as though she had sprouted wings. Sophia felt heat flood her cheeks, but she refused to drop her gaze. You remember a single sentence from a masked conversation 3 years ago? I remember every sentence, Leopold said softly. Especially the ones that made me feel less alone in a ballroom full of people. The air in the room changed, as though someone had opened a window in winter. Sophia's pulse beat in her throat. She searched his face for mockery and found none, only that steady, impossible regard. Her mother rallied with the desperation of a commander whose troops are routing. Sophia has always been bookish. We humor her little hobby. More tea, Your Grace. Leopold ignored her entirely. Tell me, Lady Sophia, have you read Feuerbach's Essence of Christianity? I found his argument that God is merely the projection of human desires both exhilarating and infuriating. Sophia blinked. I have. And I agree it is exhilarating, until one realizes he reduces love to anthropology and theology to wish fulfillment. Rather like explaining a waltz by counting the steps and forgetting the music. His smile this time was slow, devastating. Exactly. You have the gift of cutting straight to the heart of a thing. Lord Eldridge tried again, voice cracking slightly. The railway shares. We'll still be there in 10 minutes, Leopold said without looking away from Sophia. Whereas a conversation like this is rare as snowfall in August. Sophia felt the reckless calm fracture into something brighter, more dangerous. She leaned forward, forgetting the hideous dress, forgetting her mother's frantic signals, forgetting everything but the man across from her who was speaking to her as though they were the only two souls in Vienna. Very well, she said. Then let us be rare. Tell me, Your Grace, do you believe the Habsburg Empire can survive the coming century, or are we all dancing on the edge of a volcano? Her father made a noise like a kettle about to explode. Her mother's fan snapped shut with the finality of a judge's gavel. Leopold's eyes gleamed. I believe, he said, that empires fall when they forget how to listen to inconvenient women. So perhaps the fate of Europe rests on whether men like me finally learn to pay attention. It was the most outrageous, flirtatious, revolutionary thing any man had ever said to her in her entire life. Sophia laughed, could not help it. A clear, unguarded sound that rang against the painted ceiling and made the footmen grin behind their gloves. Outside, church bells began to strike 4. Inside, the rules of the game, every careful rule Sophia had lived by for 4 seasons, shattered like spun sugar. And Leopold von Hartmann, Duke of Schattenberg, looked at the disheveled, sharp-tongued woman in the hideous olive-brown dress as though she had just handed him the keys to a kingdom he had not known he was seeking. The tea cooled untouched. No one noticed. The footmen had retreated to the farthest corners of the room like well-trained shadows, even the bees outside the window seemed to hover in suspense. Sophia and Leopold were locked in a duel more thrilling than any waltz, and the weapons were words. Leopold set his cup aside and leaned forward, elbows on knees, the ruby at his throat catching fire from the afternoon sun. Then answer me this, Lady Sophia, he said, voice low and deliberate. If empires fall when they silence inconvenient women, why do the women themselves so often agree to be silenced? Why the lowered eyes, the murmured as you think best, the endless embroidery of pleasant nothings? Sophia felt the question strike bone. She had asked it of herself 1,000 nights, staring at the canopy of her bed while the orchestra played downstairs. Because, she said slowly, most women are taught from the cradle that love, safety, even bread on the table depend on never giving offense. A man may lose a fortune at cards and still be welcomed everywhere. A woman who speaks one sentence too frankly risks being banished as unmarriageable, unlovable, unnatural. The cage is gilded, Your Grace, but the bars are real. Her mother's fan cracked in half. Lord Eldridge looked as though he were praying for the floor to open and swallow him whole. Leopold, however, looked enchanted. Yet here you sit, he said softly, outside the cage, dressed like defiance itself, speaking truths sharp enough to draw blood. How did you escape the bars? Sophia gave a small, bitter smile. I never managed to want the things the cage offered badly enough. Marriage without respect seemed a slower death than spinsterhood. So I chose the quicker one. And now, he pressed. Do you still choose it? The question hung between them like a drawn blade. Sophia felt her pulse in her fingertips, in her throat, behind her eyes. I choose, she said at last, not to lie. Not today. Something flared in Leopold's expression, admiration, certainly, but something fiercer, too. He opened his mouth to answer, but her father finally found his voice. Fascinating though this philosophical excursion is, Lord Eldridge said with the air of a man stepping between duelists, perhaps we might return to the matter of the railway concession. Leopold lifted one hand, a gesture so slight it should not have carried imperial authority, yet the earl fell silent mid-sentence. With respect, my lord, Leopold said, railways will wait. Revolutions in thought will not. He turned back to Sophia. Tell me the book that most unsettled you this past winter. She did not hesitate. Mary Wollstonecraft. A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. My copy is so annotated the margins have surrendered. A slow smile spread across his face. I have 2 copies, one pristine for the library, one so marked up it is practically a palimpsest. We must compare notes. Lady Eldridge rose in a rustle of panic. Sophia, perhaps His Grace would care to see the new conservatory. But Leopold was already speaking again. And Schopenhauer? Do you accept his pessimism, or do you fight it? I fight it, Sophia said instantly. Not because the world is kind, but because despair is a luxury no woman can afford. We are required to hope even when hope is declared unladylike. He laughed again, that low, delighted sound that seemed to vibrate in her ribcage. Brava, he murmured. I have spent years surrounded by women trained to reflect my opinions back at me like mirrors. You, Lady Sophia, are a window thrown open in a stuffy room. Sophia felt the blood rise hot in her cheeks. No one had ever called her a window before. A thorn, a bluestocking, a cautionary tale, yes. Never a window. She lifted her chin. Beware, Your Grace. Fresh air can give people shocking ideas. I am counting on it. The silence that followed was electric. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Lady Eldridge attempted a last, desperate salvage. More tea. Leopold ignored her. He rose inched forward until his knees nearly brushed Sophia's. Walk with me in the garden, he said, not quite a question, not quite a command. The cherry trees are in blossom, and I find myself starving for more of your shocking ideas. Sophia's heart slammed against her stays. A duke did not ask an unmarried lady to walk alone unless he intended something decisive. Her mother's eyes were wide with terror and calculation, her father looked faintly ill. Sophia stood. The kerseymere rustled like an angry cat. I should warn you, she said, placing her hand, trembling only slightly, on the sleeve he offered, I rarely agree with anyone for the sake of peace. Leopold's fingers closed warmly over hers. I should be disappointed if you did. As they moved toward the glass doors that led to the terrace, Lady Eldridge made one final, frantic lunge. Sophia. Your shawl. Your bonnet. At least. But the doors were already closing behind them, and the last thing Sophia heard was her mother's voice rising into a wail that could have shattered crystal. Outside, the April air was cool and sweet with the scent of lilac and coming rain. Cherry petals drifted across the gravel path like pink snow. Leopold did not release her hand. Tell me, he said as they stepped beneath the blossoming branches, how does it feel to declare war on an entire empire before tea is finished? Sophia looked up at him, at the sharp, handsome face softened by wonder, and felt something inside her chest crack open like sunrise. Terrifying, she admitted. And absolutely necessary. He stopped walking. Turned to face her fully. For a moment the Duke of Schattenberg looked almost uncertain. Then let me stand beside you on the battlefield, he said quietly. I find I am tired of fighting alone. Above them, petals fell in slow, silent spirals. And Sophia Langford, disheveled, defiant, and suddenly, dizzyingly alive, realized the war had already been won. The garden behind the Langfords' rented palace was small by Viennese standards, yet it felt like a world unto itself once the glass doors closed behind them. The noise of the ringstrasse faded to a distant murmur, the only sounds were the hush of wind in the cherry branches and the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Pink petals drifted down in lazy spirals, catching in Sophia's loosened hair like tiny, fleeting jewels. Leopold did not offer his arm again. Instead he walked beside her, close enough that the sleeve of his black coat brushed the ugly olive-brown kerseymere with every step. The contact felt deliberate, as though he were testing whether she would move away. She did not. For a dozen paces neither spoke. Sophia's pulse beat so loudly she was certain he must hear it. When the path curved beneath a pergola heavy with early wisteria, he stopped and turned to face her. Tell me the truth, he said quietly. Did you dress like that today to repel the mysterious visitor your mother expected? The directness stole her breath. Most men would have pretended not to notice the gown. Yes, she admitted. I was tired of performing. If a man wants a decorative doll, let him buy one in the Graben. I decided to appear as I am, inconvenient, overeducated, and entirely uninterested in being charming on command. A breeze stirred the wisteria, purple blossoms rained around them. And now, he asked. Now that the visitor is me? Sophia lifted her chin. Now I am trying not to apologize for the fact that you have seen me at my worst and have not yet fled. Leopold's expression shifted, something raw and almost fierce. Your worst. He gave a soft, incredulous laugh. Sophia, have you any idea how many women I have watched arrange themselves like bouquets for my inspection? Hair curled to the minute, gowns chosen to display fortune and bosom in equal measure, conversation rehearsed until it gleamed with emptiness. I have smiled until my face ached and gone home to read military reports for relief. He took one step closer. The scent of him, leather, bergamot, and something darker, reached her. You, he said, walked into that room looking as though you had dressed for a funeral, glared at me like I was an invading army, and then proceeded to dismantle 2 centuries of philosophy before the tea was poured. I have never been less bored in my life. Sophia felt the words like champagne in her veins. Careful, Your Grace. You are perilously close to flattering me. I am perilously close to something far more dangerous, he corrected. His voice dropped. 3 years ago, at the masquerade, I let you go because I convinced myself a woman who argued with me about Faust's damnation could not possibly wish to be courted by a man whose days are spent calculating timber yields and placating archdukes. I have regretted that cowardice every day since. A petal landed on her lashes, she blinked it away. You did not seem cowardly. You seemed inevitable. You danced with Countess von Braun, then Princess Liechtenstein, then half the daughters of Europe. I assumed my 20 minutes of conversation had been a polite aberration. I danced because it was expected, he said. I looked for you in every ballroom afterward and never found you. You became the ghost that haunted the edges of my vision, green eyes behind a silver mask, a voice that made me feel awake for the first time in years. Sophia's throat tightened. I stopped attending most balls. It was easier to stay home with my books than to watch you choose women who sparkled and dimmed myself trying not to care. He reached out then, slowly, as though she were a wild thing that might bolt, and brushed a stray petal from her hair. His fingers lingered against her temple. I am here now, he said. And I have no intention of dancing with anyone else. The simplicity of it undid her. She felt the prick of tears and ruthlessly blinked them back. Your Grace. Leopold, he corrected gently. In this garden, at least, let me be only Leopold. Leopold, she repeated, tasting the name like forbidden wine. You hardly know me. One conversation 3 years ago, another this afternoon. I am sharp, argumentative, and notoriously difficult. My dowry is respectable but not dazzling. Half the ton considers me an eccentric at best, a harridan at worst. He smiled, slow, devastating. I know you read Wollstonecraft and annotate Schopenhauer. I know you would rather lose a season than your integrity. I know that when you laugh it sounds like you have just won a private war. The rest I intend to learn at leisure, if you will allow it. A shaky breath escaped her only answer for a moment. Then, and if society decides a duke cannot ally himself with a woman who dresses like a bankrupt governess and refuses to simper. His hand slid from her hair to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the curve with aching care. Then society will learn, he said, voice roughened, that this duke has finally found something worth defying it for. Above them the wisteria trembled, petals cascaded like perfumed rain. Sophia felt the last of her careful walls crumble. I am not easy to love, she warned, even as she leaned into his touch. Good, he whispered. I have had easy. I want impossible. And then, beneath a violet canopy with cherry petals drifting around them like blessings, Leopold von Hartmann bent his head and kissed her, not the chaste salute of courtship manuals, but a kiss that tasted of confession and promise and 3 wasted years. Sophia's hands rose of their own accord to grip his lapels, the hideous kerseymere pressed against flawless broadcloth, and she did not care. When they drew apart, both breathing unevenly, he rested his forehead against hers. Come to the opera tomorrow night, he said. My box. Let Vienna see that I have chosen. Sophia laughed, a soft, wondering sound. In this gown? In whatever you damn well please, he said fervently. Though I confess a selfish hope you will eventually allow me to burn this one. She smiled against his mouth. We shall negotiate terms. Behind them, unnoticed, a lace curtain twitched at an upper window. Lady Eldridge stood frozen, one hand pressed to her throat, watching her difficult, impossible daughter kiss a duke beneath a storm of blossoms. Somewhere inside the house, a clock began to strike 5. And in the garden, Sophia Langford discovered that rebellion, when answered by a man willing to rebel with her, felt exactly like flying. The news traveled faster than a courier on the Semmering railway. By 9 o'clock the next morning, every salon from the Kohlmarkt to the Belvedere was humming with the same delicious sentence. The Duke of Schattenberg was seen leaving the Langford palace yesterday afternoon with cherry petals in his hair and the plain Langford daughter clinging to his arm. By noon the sentence had acquired embellishments. He had carried her over the threshold, she had been wearing mourning, they had quarreled violently about Kant and then embraced beneath the lilacs. By 3 o'clock, wagers were being laid at the Jockey Club on the date of the betrothal, and Countess Isolde von Braun was said to have broken 2 Sèvres cups in a single rage. Sophia learned the extent of it when her mother burst into her bedroom without knocking, arms full of dress boxes and an expression of holy terror. You will wear the Worth gown tonight, Lady Eldridge announced, dropping the boxes like surrendered weapons. The ivory silk with the emerald embroidery. And the Langford pearls. And for the love of heaven, Anna will do your hair properly this time. Sophia, who had been reading Feuerbach in bed with her hair still in its nighttime braid, lowered the book slowly. Tonight? The Archduchess Sophie's ball at the Hofburg. Leopold, His Grace, sent a note. Lady Eldridge brandished a thick cream card sealed in scarlet wax. His box at the opera was apparently only the beginning. He requests the honor of your presence at the most scrutinized event of the season. Half the court will be there. The other half is inventing headaches so they can watch from the galleries. Sophia felt her stomach execute a slow, ominous roll. I do not have an invitation. You do now. Her mother's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Delivered by his own hand, along with these. She opened the largest box. Inside lay the ivory silk, shimmering like moonlight, and atop it a parure of emeralds and diamonds that made Sophia's breath catch. "He cannot simply," she began. "He can," Lady Eldridge cut in, "and he has. Refuse if you wish, but understand this, if you hide tonight, Vienna will decide you are ashamed of him. Or that he is ashamed of you." Sophia stared at the gown. It was magnificent, cut daringly low, embroidered with tiny emerald leaves that looked alive. She had never owned anything so beautiful. She had never wanted to. "I will not be paraded like a prize so," she said quietly. Her mother's face softened, just a fraction. "Then go as yourself, darling. But go armored." At 10 o'clock that evening, Sophia descended the grand staircase of the Hofburg on Leopold's arm, and the whispering stopped as though someone had slammed a door. The gown fit like a glove. Worth had clearly taken measurements from the Duke's memory alone. Emeralds blazed at her throat and wrists, her hair, tamed into a sleek chignon by Anna's trembling hands, was threaded with tiny diamonds that flashed whenever she moved. But it was her expression that silenced the room, chin high, eyes steady, mouth curved in a faint, defiant smile that said, "I know exactly what you are thinking, and I do not care." Leopold, in severe black and white with the scarlet ribbon of some obscure order across his chest, looked like midnight escorting spring. He did not release her hand once. They had promised her the first waltz, and when the orchestra struck up, he led her onto the floor as though the hundreds of staring eyes were no more than fireflies. "You are magnificent," he murmured against her ear as they turned. "I feel like a battle standard," she muttered back. "Good," he said, spinning her so the emerald leaves flashed. "Let them see whose colors you carry." They danced twice, scandalously consecutive, and then he kept her beside him while ambassadors and princes came to pay court. Sophia spoke when she wished, fell silent when she did not, and refused 3 offers to fetch her champagne with a cool politeness that made Leopold's eyes gleam with pride. Countess Isolde von Braun approached near midnight, diamonds glittering like frost, smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Grace," she purred, "one hears the most charming rumors. I do hope the little English bluestocking has not been overtaxing you with her opinions." Leopold's arm tightened around Sophia's waist. "On the contrary, Countess. Lady Sophia's opinions are the only ones worth hearing." Isolde's smile froze. Sophia felt the old temptation to retreat, then felt Leopold's thumb trace a small, steady circle against her spine. Courage flooded in. "Tell me, Countess," Sophia said sweetly, "do you still believe women should confine their reading to fashion plates? Or have you progressed to poetry?" A ripple of delicious shock ran through the onlookers. Isolde flushed crimson. "I believe," she hissed, "that some women mistake rudeness for wit." "And some," Sophia returned, "mistake silence for virtue." Leopold's laughter rang out, rich and unafraid. He raised Sophia's hand to his lips right there in front of the entire court. "Excuse us," he said to the Countess, already turning away. "My future Duchess and I have better things to do than trade clichés." The words future Duchess fell into the ballroom like a cannon shot. Gasps. Fans snapping open. A dowager Duchess actually swayed. Sophia's heart stopped, then raced on. He had not asked her. Not properly. But he had just declared it to the one assembly that mattered. As he led her toward the terrace doors, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. On the threshold he paused, looking down at her with sudden gravity. "Too soon?" he asked quietly. Sophia drew a breath that tasted of roses and rebellion. "No," she said. "Exactly on time." Outside on the moonlit balcony, with the music swelling behind them and all Vienna watching through the windows, Leopold kissed her again, slowly, deliberately, possessively. When they drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let them gossip," he whispered. "Let them rage. You are mine, and I am yours, and tomorrow we will make it official." Sophia laughed, a little breathless. "You still have not asked." He dropped to one knee right there on the cold marble, heedless of the hundreds of eyes, and took both her hands. Then let me correct that oversight. Sophia Marie Langford, will you marry me, not for my title, not for my fortune, but for every argument we have yet to have, and every morning I want to wake up to your impossible, brilliant mind? The orchestra inside reached its crescendo. Somewhere a glass shattered. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. But only if you promise to keep losing the arguments on purpose sometimes. Never, he vowed, and kissed her again while the Hofburg ballroom exploded into chaos behind them. The scandalous soirée, Vienna would later agree, had been the most glorious disaster in living memory. And the best was yet to come. The storm broke 3 days later. It began with a letter, delivered by a liveried footman who refused to meet anyone's eyes. The seal was the double-headed eagle of the imperial house itself. Leopold broke it in the Langford's morning room while Sophia watched from the window seat, a half-read volume of Shelley forgotten in her lap. His face did not change as he read, but the hand holding the paper tightened until the heavy vellum creased. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the letter with deliberate care. "An invitation. To Schönbrunn. Tomorrow afternoon. The Emperor wishes to speak with me privately." Sophia felt the temperature in the room drop. An imperial summons was never merely a conversation. "About us? About the continued stability of certain hereditary offices," he said dryly. "And the desirability of alliances that strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy." He looked at her then, and for the first time since the garden she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "They want me to marry Princess Maria Anna of Saxony. The negotiations have apparently been underway for months." The word struck harder than any slap. Sophia set the book aside. "And you knew nothing of this?" "I knew there were whispers. I ignored them." He crossed to her in 2 strides and dropped to one knee, taking her cold hands in his. "Sophia, listen to me. I will refuse." "You cannot simply refuse an emperor." "I can, and I will." His voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "Franz Joseph is 22 years old and terrified of revolution. He needs my forests, my mines, my regiments on the Italian border. He will not risk none of it for a Saxon princess when I tell him my choice is made." But Sophia was already calculating consequences the way other women calculated dance cards. "Your cousin Karl commands the Tyrol Jägers," she said quietly. "Your aunt is the emperor's godmother. If you defy the court openly, they will strip you of influence. Your tenants will suffer when the tariffs rise. Your sister's marriages will be blocked." His jaw tightened. "I have considered all of it. Have you considered me?" She pulled her hands free. "I will not be the woman who destroyed a dukedom because she wanted to win arguments at breakfast." Leopold rose, anger flaring. "You think I care for ledgers more than I care for you?" "I think you care for duty," she said. "And I will not let love make you betray it." They stared at each other across a suddenly vast distance. That night the second blow fell. A packet arrived for Sophia, anonymous, delivered by a street urchin who vanished before questions could be asked. Inside was a single sheet of hot-pressed paper covered in handwriting she knew by heart, Leopold's. "My dearest Isolde. I have played the game long enough. The English girl was an amusement, interesting, diversion, but diversions end. Meet me at the usual place, midnight tomorrow. I will bring the rubies you admired. L." The forged note was flawless, his handwriting copied with diabolical skill, even the faint ink blot he always left in the upper left corner. Sophia read it twice, felt her heart crack cleanly in two, and then did the only thing her pride allowed. She dressed in her oldest cloak, summoned a fiacre, and drove through the rain to the von Hartmann palace on the Herrengasse. Leopold received her in the library, coatless, cravat loosened, clearly working late. Surprise flashed across his face when the butler announced her. "Sophia. It is past 11. She held out the letter without a word. He scanned it. The blood drained from his face, then rushed back in a wave of fury. "This is a lie. He crumpled the paper in his fist. Isolde. Of course. She has a secretary who can forge anything. Sophia's voice came out thin and cold. It is very convincing. It is poison. He stepped toward her, she stepped back. You cannot believe I wrote this. I believe, she said, that powerful men change their minds when the price becomes clear. And I will not wait to be discarded politely. She turned to go. He caught her wrist. Look at me. She did. Rain lashed the windows behind him, lightning illuminated the stark lines of his face. I love you, he said, each word deliberate. Not as a diversion. Not as rebellion. I love the way you argue with emperors in your head before breakfast. I love the way you bite your lip when you are thinking. I love that you wore a dress the color of mud to frighten me away and only succeeded in making me fall at your feet. If the emperor himself stood here and ordered me to give you up, I would tell him to go to the devil. Thunder rolled overhead. Sophia felt the ice inside her begin to crack. Then what do we do? We fight, he said simply. Together. He pulled her into his arms, and she resisted for one heartbeat, then let herself be held. The forged letter fell to the carpet, forgotten. The next afternoon they rode to Schönbrunn in an open carriage, side by side, gloveless, defiant. Half of Vienna lined the roads to watch. When they were ushered into the emperor's private study, Franz Joseph, young, stiff in his white uniform, rose with icy courtesy. Your Grace, he began without preamble, we are informed you intend an unsuitable connection. Leopold bowed, every inch the Grand Seigneur. With respect, Majesty, I intend the most suitable connection of my life. The emperor's gaze flicked to Sophia, lingering on the emerald engagement ring that had appeared on her finger that morning, a single stone the color of her eyes, flanked by tiny diamonds shaped like open books. You risk much, Franz Joseph said. I risk everything, Leopold answered. And consider it a bargain. A long silence. Then the young emperor did something no one expected, he smiled, a small, reluctant curve. My mother warned me you were stubborn. Very well. Marry your English bluestocking. But if the Saxons withdraw their loan, you will shoulder the cost of your own regiments. Leopold bowed again, deeper this time. Gladly. Outside, in the echoing corridor, Sophia exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for days. You gambled an empire, she whispered. He lifted her hand and kissed the ring. I gambled nothing I was not willing to lose. And I won everything worth keeping. That evening they walked in the Prater under a sky washed clean by rain. Somewhere behind them, footmen kept a discreet distance, ahead, the lanterns of the Wurstelprater glowed like fallen stars. Sophia stopped beneath a chestnut tree just coming into leaf. I was cruel last night, she said. I should have trusted you. You were magnificent, he countered. You were willing to walk away rather than ruin me. That is why I will never let you go. He drew a small box from his pocket, inside lay the mate to her emerald ring, this one set with a single perfect pearl. For the arguments won fairly, he said, slipping it onto her other hand. Sophia laughed through sudden tears. You are impossible. And you, he said, pulling her close, are inevitable. Behind them, in the shadows of the trees, a photographer from the Neue Freie Presse raised his camera. The next morning all Vienna would see the photograph, the Duke of Schattenberg kissing his unconventional bride beneath spring leaves, both of them smiling as though they had invented joy. The trials, it turned out, had only forged them stronger. They were married on the first day of June, in the small Baroque chapel of Schloss Schattenberg, high above the Danube where the river bends like a silver ribbon through pine-dark hills. The emperor sent a golden rose from his private chapel and a note in his own hand, may your union be as stubborn as you are. The court took it as absolution. Vienna took it as the most romantic scandal of the century. Sophia walked the aisle alone, no father to give her away, because she had declared, with that quiet steel Leopold now adored, that she was not property of no one but herself. She wore ivory silk so pale it looked like moonlight-made cloth, cut simply, almost severely, with no jewels except the emerald engagement ring and the pearl he had given her in the prater. Her hair was unbound beneath the lace veil, a river of auburn down her back, because she refused to be trussed like a bride doll. When Leopold saw her at the chapel doors, his breath left him so completely that his best man had to nudge him to step forward. The vows were not the usual ones. They had written their own, and the old priest, who had baptized Leopold 40 years earlier, read them with a tremor of wonder in his voice. I, Leopold Matthias Alexander, take you, Sophia Marie, to be my wife, my equal, my conscience, and my most cherished opponent. I vow to listen when I wish to command, to argue when I wish to silence, and to love you fiercely even when you are entirely wrong, which will be often. Laughter rippled through the ancient rafters. I, Sophia Marie, take you, Leopold Matthias Alexander, to be my husband, my partner in all rebellions, and the keeper of my heart. I vow to challenge you daily, to keep you honest with sharp words and sharper kisses, and to love you even when you are insufferably aristocratic, which will be always. The priest had to clear his throat twice before pronouncing them man and wife. They kissed before he gave permission, a long, unhurried kiss that drew gasps from dowagers and cheers from younger cousins. When they finally parted, Leopold rested his forehead against hers and whispered, for her ears alone, I was wrong. You are never wrong. Liar, she whispered back, smiling. But keep practicing. The wedding breakfast was held in the castle's great hall beneath banners that had flown at Leipzig and Austerlitz. There were no stiff court quadrilles. Instead, a Tyrolean band played wild waltzes, and Leopold spun his duchess across the flagstones until her hair came entirely loose and the emperor's golden rose trembled in her bouquet. Later, when the sun slipped behind the mountains and the candles were lit, they slipped away unnoticed. Leopold led her up the narrow stone stairs to the western tower, the one that looked out over the river and the forests that were now half hers. A blanket and a bottle of champagne waited. Someone, probably his valet, who adored Sophia already, had been bribed. They sat on the parapet, legs dangling over a 1,000-foot drop, passing the bottle back and forth like conspirators. Regrets? He asked, tracing the new gold band on her finger. Only one, she said. She reached into her pocket and drew out a folded square of olive-brown kerseymere, the last surviving scrap of the hideous gown that had started everything. She had cut it from the hem the night before. Leopold raised an eyebrow. Sophia struck a match and held the flame to the cloth. It caught at once, flaring bright against the dusk. I thought we should give it a proper funeral, she said as the fabric burned to ash between her fingers. It served its purpose. He watched the final ember die, then pulled her into his lap. You know, he said, mouth against her temple, I fell in love with you the moment you walked into that drawing room looking like you had dressed to attend your own execution. Liar, she laughed. You fell in love when I called Goethe sentimental. No, he said seriously. I started falling then. I finished falling when you refused to let me ruin myself for you. And I have been falling ever since. Far below, music drifted up, someone was playing a Strauss waltz on an out-of-tune piano. Sophia leaned back against her husband's chest and felt the future open before them like the valley at their feet. Tell me we will argue tomorrow, she said. Every day, he promised. And the day after. And every day after that, until we are very old and very loud and the servants hide when they hear us coming. She turned in his arms to kiss him, slow, deliberate, certain. Good, she whispered against his mouth. I have a lifetime of opinions to inflict on you. He laughed, the sound rolling out across the darkening forests. Then let it begin. Years later, travelers on the Danube steamers would point up at the lighted windows of Schloss Schattenberg and tell the story, how the sharp-tongued English duchess and her impossible duke still argued over Kant at breakfast, still kissed in corridors like reckless lovers, and ruled their lands with a blend of justice and mischief that made emperors nervous and tenants grateful. And on quiet evenings, when the wind carried the scent of pine and river water up the valley, those who passed close enough could sometimes hear laughter, bright, defiant, unmistakably hers, followed by a low, answering rumble that could only be his. Proof, the locals said, that love, true, stubborn, intellectual love, could outlast empires, outshine diamonds, and burn brighter than any scandal Vienna ever tried to smother it with. In the end, the olive-brown dress had been the perfect gown after all. It had simply took the right man to see it.